Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 41 being recorded on September 8, 2022. My assistant, Ben Shapiro, is still on assignment. So in this stream, this is basically spillover from yesterday's stream, number 40, and we're going to keep it going with the COVID stuff. That's probably going to go on for a few weeks. COVID's a huge problem. It's about to, in my opinion, probably get worse as we go into fall and all of the restrictions are eased, etc. I don't think that that's going to be helpful in the slightest. There are the BA4, BA5 targeted boosters or semi-targeted boosters. I think that they also cover earlier, now extinct strains of COVID as well for reasons I'm not really too sure of. It's like buying dinosaur repellent. Like, you're not going to get too many opportunities to use that. I guess, if it mutates back into some earlier form, I guess that could help. But anyway. So yeah, you've got the more targeted booster, but you've also got easing of many types of restrictions. So, on balance, is this going to be a net improvement or a net, I think on the whole, this is going to leave us worse off. So that's my estimation. I don't think it'll be neutral. I think it'll be actively worse. So, I love it. In a proper world, Ben Shapiro would be relegated to a terrible action news team. Well, he tells me that he has come over to the left, and we've got to take that seriously. Every time a right-winger says that they are now a leftist, we have to drop everything to believe them. And so that's why Ben's with us now. He's been struggling, it's true, but I'm sure that if we just keep giving him unlimited chances, he's going to eventually, get it. Okay. Right. Hopefully people can spot the joke here. I hate to spell it out, but, All right, what's going on in the chat before we dig into some of the meat? I do have a bunch of COVID stuff. And, we have some housekeeping as well. So, for example, I'll mention this before we get to the chat. We mentioned that Infracel got booted off of Twitter, adding to his collection of bannings. Got booted off of Twitter, which, news that was roundly met with approval from most people who are just sick of his disruptive influence and his followers' disruptive influence. So he's now been kicked off of Twitch. He's been kicked off of Twitter. I guess he's still got the YouTube, but for however long that lasts as well. Where's he going to go next? Like Rumble, Odyssey, Gab. I think he actually is on Truth Social, though. So that's, I believe, according to what somebody was posting. Let me see if I have the screenshot here. Where are we? Yeah. So I've been silenced by the fraudulent. I haven't had time to confirm this. I have no reason to believe that this is, fake. But I've been silenced by the fraudulent big tech Democrats, just like President Trump, for telling the truth. Skillful use of all caps, I might add. I'm happy to join my MAGA brothers and sisters on Truth Social. If they're your brothers and sisters, can we just drop the pretense that you're a communist, please? Anyway, just absurd stuff. But anyway, so what I heard is reasons why he got kicked off boiled down to essentially he doxed some guy and was encouraging his followers to harass and possibly even murder his children. That's what I heard. So that's apparently the reason why he got kicked off. And then 2 days later, 1 or 2 days later, like I heard this news yesterday. It may have happened late on the 6th, I'm not sure. But basically, 36 hours. In under 36 hours, where is he? He's appearing on CGTN. So if you needed a reason to stop taking CGTN seriously, it has arrived. Recently I had a tweet go semi-viral, which is a tweet from like 2 weeks ago, a week and a half prior to the interest that people started taking in it. where I was just, it was a random shout into the void at the time, because I am always looking for decent information on China. Like, I'm aware of the criticisms that China is social imperialist and or, less so social even, but that at a minimum China is social imperialist. Like, I'm aware of those criticisms. I have tried to stay somewhat flexible on this because it's just so hard to get lots of quality information in English where you can actually go through the data. And in fact, some of the data I've seen seems vastly different from any kind of European capitalism. Whether this is just leftover vestiges of an earlier period in China's history or what it is. Like, I understand some of the confusion that people have. So I haven't, at this point, my emphasis in the channel has not been about taking a super firm stance one way or the other on, in terms of China. I think that as China becomes more and more of a central player in the world, we're going to see China's actions kind of tell us more about where they stand on different things. For example, its alliance or not with Russia, excuse me, in terms of Russia invading Ukraine and things like that. So far, they have not done a ton of hard support for that, and it's, time will tell where a lot of things shake out. That said, you don't necessarily need those specific questions to analyze the situation more deeply, etc. But anyway, that's just, to me, a problem that I bemoan from time to time on Twitter when I see Chinese stuff that I follow pop up. Just like putting simple questions out there, and it just never gets good answers. And there was a Chinese official that I had posted something to that it was like just total shout into the void. Like, I thought maybe it would get 10 likes, whatever. Anyway, a week and a half later, people started picking up on it, and it was a real Rorschach test. It attracted all kinds of sort of misinterpretations from people who, I mean, just you name it. There was all kinds of stuff. But I wound up making a longer post sort of explaining where I was coming from in asking why kids had to pay for school lunch in China, which was there could have been a perfectly good answer to that question. Instead, it turned into this, like, international incident. Really bizarre stuff. Tons of insults, very little actual information, which was sort of the point in the first place. So that to me is kind of a running issue, is the difficulty of getting information about China where people can make up their minds about what China is doing. I think that some people judge some of the Belt and Road stuff too harshly. I also think that there are clear examples of China not doing internationalist stuff that is really glaring in terms of falling down, I think, in terms of everything that we know about the history of Marxism to date. So, my position on it has been, I see some signs for hope, and I also see signs for real concern. But for real, you just had Infracel on as, like, your U.S., man inside the U.S. commenting on the midterms. To me, the timing is super interesting because it's like he gets kicked off of Twitter, and then literally within 36 hours, he's on CGTN. This, to me, suggests possibly somebody trying to keep their boy in the game, with kind of this high-profile appearance. So, what is this about? And I had somebody responding to this saying, China, that CGTN, it's aimed at a non-Marxist audience, so they tend to do more appealing to liberals. Okay, except Infracel appeals to no one but Fash. And somebody else pointed out that, well, they've had Dugan on. Here's the thing, though. Dugan may be vile, but he at least has some international significance. He's not entirely irrelevant. Infracel is entirely irrelevant. He is a ex-Twitch, ex-Twitter streamer who no one takes seriously. LaRouche adjacent, LaRouche supporting, complete joke. Why would CGTN have him on? especially with this whole concept of China as being like, well, they don't give out a lot of information about themselves because they're trying to tightly control perceptions and, the PR of China in general. I'm sorry, but no one concerned about impressions or PR, the optics, is going to have this guy on the stream. Can you imagine being one of these old guys that are on the stream with him? Being like, they put like a neo-fash streamer dude with like 20,000 followers on the stream with me. It's a joke. So yeah, I wonder who pulled strings on this one. Like, how did this happen? Again, to me, it smacks of like, oh shit, our guy got banned from Twitter. Keep him relevant. That would be my impression. But it is what it is. Unfortunately, I think this is not the greatest thing as far as CGTN's credibility. And for all the people who want to come at me with like, oh, white Western leftist, who cares what you think? If you think that this is like solely my opinion, you have another thing coming. You can say whatever you want to try to console yourself. This is frankly absurd. So I'm quite sure I'm not going to be the only one to point that out. So yeah, this actually happened. Let's get that bit of unpleasantness off the screen. I think oh, you know what? One other thing, bit of good news. So amid all of the anti-abortion stuff going on in the U.S., a new poll, Wall Street Journal poll, 60% of voters now say that abortion should be legal in all or most cases, which is kind of that's historically about what it's been. It had slipped recently down to 55%, but it's back up. And only 6% said that abortion should be illegal in all cases. That's down from 11% in March. So all of this anti-abortion stuff over the last year has actually brought the issue and the importance of it back into people's consciousness, and support for abortion has gone back up, and support for restriction has gone down. 6% saying that it should be illegal in all cases is a vanishingly small, incredibly marginal number. So anyway, bit of good news there. But let's check in with the chat, because I really think everything else that I've got going on today is COVID related. So before we get into all that, let's see what's on people's minds. I also have yesterday's chat as well. So somebody says, would like to see Vosh go now that Haas and Maupin are beaten, more or less. Well, people are still trying to keep Infracel in the game, so I don't know. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, Vosh. So yeah, people have asked, like, who's the next target now that, like, Maupin is gone, etc. First of all, I mean, Maupin, had been a target for a long time. Turned out what people were saying about him was accurate. He really was running a very cult-like organization and was exploiting people, according to the allegations, which he has not really denied. He's like, yeah, it's mostly true. Actually, it's not true. Whatever, I'm going to vanish now. So I would call that not really a denial. So yeah, Vosh is definitely a toxic presence, which really there is, Bad Empanada calls it the human centipede, like, of clout off of Vosh. Like, Vosh leads the pack. There's basically like the two human centipedes, one that's headed by Destiny, one that's headed by Vosh. And then you just have like scores and scores of streamers who follow in their wake, feeding off their clout in different ways. So, if you take Vosh out, you would also silence and discredit a lot of the other stuff. So that would be something we'd like to see. I'd also like to see the entire Jimmy Dore orbit go down. So that's another priority for me, and I'll be working up to that, and I appreciate whoever wants to collaborate on that. I think Dore is more slippery in a way, because it's now switched to being so brash, so boomer. The thumbnails look like National Enquirer headlines, basically. In a way, this is a thing I remember from back in the day. There was like an old, like, liberal documentary about, I'm trying to think, was it Outfoxed? I can't remember the name. That was about Fox News, because believe it or not, Fox News wasn't always the sort of extreme Republican Party propaganda outfit that it was. Maybe it leaned right, but it was actually more balanced originally. And then I forget if it was late 90s or after Bush Cheney in 2001, but around that time, around 2000, a little over 20 years ago, it switched into being this like very, very vigorous propaganda outfit. And you could say, all bourgeois propaganda is in some way. This was a shift even on their terms, like as far as how hard they were pushing, etc. And Bill O'Reilly was the lead anchor and the lead personality, and so a lot of the analysis was on like just what an like insane bully Bill O'Reilly was on that show, which is really what Speaking of Infracel and people like that, that's exactly it's the psychotic bully routine. It's basically just Bill O'Reilly warmed over. That's all it is. That is the model. So anyway, there was a part in there about how somebody, I want to say it was Al Franken, was trying to sue, or at least he was, I think, relating the story, trying to sue O'Reilly for defamation. But it turned out that like the more outlandish the kind of claims that somebody makes on a regular basis are, the harder it is to sue them for defamation, because it's sort of like the Alex Jones thing. You really have to go to an extreme level of harmful statements, because like the entire thing is so crazy, he can just sort of wave it away as like performance art, which is literally what Alex Jones' lawyer tried to do. It's very hard. Like you have to go. What they say has to be so extremely damaging. It's relative to the background of what they say on a regular basis. Anyway, I think you get the point. In order to prove that it's like specially harmful, and anyway, it's the Jimmy Dore thing. It's gotten to a point where it's not just like a few statements. Like everything is so heightened and elevated. It's kind of hard to pick through it. In fact, I was gonna do a Jimmy Dore criticism video. Actually, it was on Alex Jones, as a matter of fact, because Jimmy Dore had that famous sort of thing where he did the spit take on Alex Jones back in 2016 at whatever convention it was, like spit out a bunch of soda onto him. And, that this was back when Jimmy Dore had not done the whole MAGA thing yet. He was still like firmly on Bernie's side and was much more left. It's hard to believe if you didn't hear him before 2017, but he wasn't, like he was always maybe kind of sleazy, he's this, sort of LA comedian. But it wasn't anywhere near the level of like concerted grifting that he's doing and has been doing since 2017. The fallout of like him getting kind of kicked off of the Young Turks, quietly sort of exiled from the Young Turks, gradually exiled, whatever. Anyway, he had, this running thing with Jimmy Dore and Alex Jones. And so he was commenting on it. But he was like, the whole thing was couched in terms of like how Alex Jones should never have been deplatformed and this and that. And like literally that people who constantly say harmful shit on social media, it should just always be settled in court. It's very much like the libertarian scenario of like, we shouldn't have any regulations, but just if you demonstrate harm, then you should be able to like sue. That all of society should just be based on like not laws, but individual contracts. And then if a contract is broken or your NAP is violated, like somebody commits force or fraud against you, then you should be able to take them to court. Do you know what kind of a judiciary system we would need to have for that to be? And like, do you know where laws even come from in the first place, many of them? It's like when a scenario keeps coming up over and over again, or a scenario will foreseeably lead to many, many instances of harm, then it makes sense to just prohibit it in the first place. Just be like, hey, don't do this because, it's going to lead to many things. And that way you put out the expectation that certain behaviors are not tolerated because they, lead to so much harm, etc. That's what he was saying is like basically no one should ever be kicked off of like, social media or anything like that. It just should solely be handled in court. Which also, how much money does it cost? Are you going to make taking people to court free? Because law is a rich person's game in capitalism, So anyway, it was like there was so much going on in that video. I had to stop after about 2 minutes. I'm like, I can't even delve into this. So I do think that more of the people in the Jimmy Dore orbit, so Vosh is obviously a major target, and there's people in the Vosh orbit. I think Dore is another big target because a lot of this toxic right-wing populist crap is coming out of him and people who are in the Jimmy Dore human clout centipede. So that I would say that as well. Anyway, continuing with the comments here. So yeah, the Queen died, Queen of England. I think she was 96. I mean, okay, she died. All people die. The fact that she was 96 actually means that she sort of outran death for like 2 decades. You know, everyone's death is inevitable. It's not really a huge win. It is what it is. And then there will be somebody else behind. Let's see. The only thing Infracel ever contributed is the amount of laughter provided due to him not knowing. Yeah, Two Holes Gang. Two Holes Gang. We did a video on that. Infracel is rising in her urethra. And then the fact that he tried to, like, justify that somehow. It's like, well, no, I was referring to this. And it's just like, the question was very clear, actually. So another comment, it's easy to see what Infracel is trying to do if we understand that fascists are pro-capitalism but anti-bourgeoisie. They want a capitalism without the bourgeoisie because the crisis will eventually require a new leadership for monopoly capitalism. They want a Chinese-style state capitalism, not as a means to an end, but as the end product itself. Yeah, this is all window dressing on the basic crisis of capitalism. They want to... I think it's even a bit more fundamental than this. I don't know if most of the people following Infracel have any clear idea of what they want, aside from just owning the libs and, you know, contribute, like being part of a hate organization for people that they perceive as their enemies. I think that that is pretty much where it ends for most people. They can't do any serious analysis and have no serious understanding of really anything. But the people who do understand what fascism is about and help to craft the messaging behind it, I would say revolutionary aesthetics, revolutionary appearance, counter-revolutionary content, counter-revolutionary messaging. So that's basically what it is. It's a kind of fake socialism put out to confuse workers during times of crisis for capitalism. I think most of it falls under this basic heading. Mussolini worked for MI5. He used to be a socialist and then, you know, helped to suppress the anti-war movement against World War I. Stuff like that. They're there to throw a wrench in the works of socialism. And I think that that's what it's all about. Yeah, and as far as CGTN being okay with this, I mean, come on. Have some standards. You know, I've tried not to... we'll be, you know, addressing analysis of China, the history, and the present more at some point. Again, I don't want to toss the entire thing out, but... there's a lot of people who really don't want to recognize any of the glaring issues with Chinese capitalism. And I didn't say the whole thing is capitalism, but they're, by their own admission, allowing a lot of capitalism. The problems with Chinese capitalism are enormous, and a lot of people just aren't really ready to see any of that, and I think that that's just pulling the wool over your own eyes. So... you know, I think that a lot of what I would like people not to do is just merely shut down when this conversation starts, because it's such a charged issue, and what I would really like is more thoughtful, you know, a more thoughtful discussion of it, a more thoughtful approach. So, you know, that's what will be. That's why I haven't just rushed straight into it. I think there's a lot that needs to be considered, and people are. That's one issue where people are definitely just out to form teams, and you know, I would like to go into it from a different angle. So yeah. I think Press TV of Iran similarly lets on, quote, experts with little vetting. Yeah, I don't know what this is about, to be honest. Like, you see it with Russia Today, you see it with Press TV, clearly now CGTN as well. This model of like, hey, we found some random like blogger or streamer that has a couple tens of thousands of followers. Let's have them on, okay? And just really, what is this about? What? Why? I don't understand it honestly in the slightest. So I mean, at least on its face, it makes no sense at all. So that would take some digging into. It's not just because of their sheer popularity, because most of these people are virtually unknown. Um, what is it about? How does it happen? Like, for example, Jason Unruh, Maoist Rebel News, has been on Press TV for years, on and off. And no offense to Jason, like, I think he's been on the better side of many issues. But, like, how did this happen? I mean, did it strike him as odd? You know what I mean? Like, if one of these outlets approached me, which frankly I don't want, I would be enormous. I'd be like, why did you overlook the thousands of other people that you could have asked? Or, I mean, or did they just turn you down? Like, to approach me instead. It wouldn't make any sense at all. So, anyway. I downloaded the Xinhua app and it's nonstop boring state propaganda. Yeah, that's kind of my issue with a lot of what comes out of China. It's very dull, very superficial, like an inch deep, very shallow stuff. And so it's very hard to analyze, do any analysis of what's going on in China. They just don't give you much information. I started reading on the channel Xi Jinping's governance of China. It was just like ad copy. Like there wasn't much to it from what I read, and it was incredibly boring. So yeah, I kind of moved on. So it could be what they're doing is super amazing, and they're really they're gonna hit that socialism button in 2050, and there's like super exciting things going on behind the scenes. However, I do not they're keeping it a really big secret if that's the case. So, that was part of the point that I was making is like, I think we need a better conversation about China. Like, okay, to put it another way, one of the ways that I often frame this is many, many people, like the overwhelming majority of people who hold opinions on China from outside of China, they're either in the China good or the China bad category, both of which are a very superficial, just propaganda level of understanding. You get the China bad people who, okay, great, you read some anti-China propaganda from the US or some US ally, and boom, China bad. It doesn't go any deeper than that. Then you get the people who go, well, wait a minute, the US is a war criminal and, is like the leading, the military wing of global imperialism right now. Let's distrust the US. China good. Everything that the US says, obviously the polar opposite is, correct. Like what they say is wrong and the exact opposite is correct. This is a sort of knee-jerk contrarianism. Therefore, China good. But it's still on this very kind of it's, I'll give you some credit for like opposing a new Cold War and stuff like that. That's good, okay? But it's still very shallow. Because then you go beyond that, beyond the overwhelming majority of people who do have a very propagandistic, shallow understanding of the situation and have formed their often very strong opinions of the situation on very little information. Or, just even some talking points or some very basic Marxist theory like developing the productive forces, becoming like a blank check for just literally excusing anything and everything. That is shallow. That's not really based on a deeper dive. And then you could go beyond that and do actual research, for example, of like investors in the Belt and Road Initiative and behavior of private Chinese companies in both in China and outside of China, etc. That it's not always the rosiest picture. But I think a lot of people are just not ready for it at this point. And as much as I want to get there as fast as we can, as far as S4A's, hopefully critical probing coverage of the situation, I think, unfortunately, way too many people are just not even remotely ready to move beyond either China good, China bad. This kind of, black and white, very simplistic view. So, But then again, we say Rev 2030, so still got another like 7 years or so before, to me, a lot of the more medium term goals of this channel are to really be evaluated. So hopefully we'll get there soon. So what else? The Fourth International of Three Holism. Yep. Renegade Haas of the Two Hole International. So yeah, I mean, let's talk about commercialism in here as well. When people run channels, I run a channel, you have to make various choices about how you're going to support yourself during the time that you're devoting to your efforts. So I believe it's the revolutionary duty of class conscious proletarians to contribute to the revolution in whatever ways that they think that they're most able to do that. And I happen to be kind of good at reading, and I managed to squeak out of the education system with a decent level of education. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll help read stuff and help analyze stuff and try to help facilitate discussions and things like that. But it does take time, and you do have bills to pay. If you can get compensated for it in some way, yeah, I mean, it's helpful. Here at S4A, we just do the Patreon. I don't do ads, and I don't do the sponsorships, nor am I expecting to. Specifically on the ads, that's a view I've had for a long time, because the ads really help Google, and they help the companies that are producing the ads much more than they help the channel. And to me, it's not worth it to do that. And I would rather just have the voluntary support of people who are in the audience, which is also a good metric of like, is what I'm doing landing. Also, I think it reduces some of the perverse incentive to do clickbait. So obviously there's things that are going to be more popular and less popular on the channel, but I don't want that hanging over my head constantly of like, oh, what kind of ad revenue is this video going to do, etc. I think that to a large extent commercialism should be divorced from any kind of communist media. It seems to me like that is an obvious statement, but it's not the way that a lot of people do it. And I do think that in some ways it taints the content to varying degrees depending on how people handle that. But somebody, yeah, like a Vosh, you watch his stream, people are just throwing $50 at a time at him, like individual contributors. That's on top of like all the ad money or whatever else. And do you think at that point that you would give the slightest shit about what you're actually saying? I mean, I think it's an afterthought at that point when you have that much money coming at you. Like, it doesn't matter what you say. You could fart into the microphone. People are still going to be like, wow, brilliant satire of streaming culture. Here's $100. So it might not pay as well, but that's not really the point. Actually, speaking of, let's thank the patrons while while we're doing all this talk about funding. But I think it's relevant here as far as, somebody like an Infracel, what are they in it for? And then you have the other question of like, are there larger political forces propping some of these people up? We know like Maupin's connections through RT, and he has spoken about how they have kind of, jetted him around the world, meeting with people in Iran and Russia. I bet that goes to the head of somebody, look at me, I'm a VIP, Russia did that. And, just what that does to a person. So, anyway, thanks to the patrons whose names are on the screen. You know the thing, I say it in every goddamn video that we do on the channel. But seriously, thanks to the patrons. But anyway, that's what it's about. And you have to kind of wonder how sincere any of this is. But when you get somebody like Infracel who just sticks with it despite being wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong and proved wrong over and over and over again, there's obviously some other agenda at play. And I think that it goes beyond just trolling. I don't think that anybody gets that much of a perverse thrill out of doing something like this and coming under such heat for it, under such sustained mockery for such a long period of time. I don't think that it's just purely like, hey, I'm owning the libs. I don't think that accounts for all of it, at least in my estimation. Then again, I don't actually know the guy. And you look at a Peter Coffin, who got famous for kicking himself in the crotch on TV, and you look at Maupin and the whole humiliation fetish, you wonder what kind of perverse processes are going on in the minds of people to like, do they actually get off on people like, thousands of people simultaneously calling them like fucking idiots? Like, do they get off on that in some way? Who knows? I would tend to think that, I don't know, is anybody that far gone? But all right, what else? What else? Um, no one around me takes COVID seriously. This is at a huge university. Well, we can thank the CDC and the state governments and all of that because they're the ones doing it. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the COVID stuff in the stream. In a proper world, Ben Shapiro would be relegated to a terrible action news team. Yeah, he became the world's youngest nationally syndicated columnist at age 17. Well-connected family, I think. So, did I hear that Nazi Jared Taylor got to speak at a large university and got paid from them too? No, I'm actually not familiar with that person at all. CGTN isn't even taken seriously in China. It's better than CNN, but if that's the bar for good media. Well, let's just say I would hope not. I would hope not. But really, I mean, you're trying to have some international credibility, I assume. Like, unless the channel is literally just put out there for people like, Bay Area 451 or whatever. Like, unless the channel is literally just for extremely gullible people who would just, like, believe anything they see as long as the Chinese government's name is attached to it, then, I don't know. I would think, like, some more effort could maybe go into it, but... Although another comment. I guess it's tailored for people outside of China who are overly supportive of the CPC. I think overly supportive is one way to put it. I think uncritically supportive that's kind of the key element. Infracel, the great political mind, coming live from his mom's basement. I mean, wherever it is, it has that, parents' basement feel to it for sure. And I've had parents' basement days as well. Like, many of us go through that. Um, the idea is not to, like, pretend that you really have something to say at that point. So, speculation that the LaRouche organization pulled strings, because they do seem to have some demonstrated ties to China, and Infracel's in league with Daniel Burke, who's also connected to Maupin. Yeah, I don't know, but whoever was responsible for putting him on CGTN, I gotta wonder if there was any internal dissent at CGTN about that, like this guy, this guy, you're putting this guy on. Do you think a proxy war against China is in the works, maybe in Africa or South Asia, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos? I think that world capitalism is coming into another large crisis, like, World War One style large crisis, and I think that that's possible. I mean, this is what I was saying about the signs of Russia becoming more belligerent and getting more brazen in terms of the steps that they're taking, provoking the West and denouncing the West. Meaning I use that sloppy terminology as well sometimes, but I don't like it. Specifically it's the USA and EU and allies. Um, So yeah, as far as a rival imperialism, it's like a lot of the same capital firms are operating in Russia and China today. And people will always hand wave this away with, well, China keeps them under control, and it's like, okay, I mean, says you, can we verify this somehow, like extensively, and to what end? Like, what is the end goal? Okay, developing the productive forces, we got it. It's just, you kind of go around in a circle a lot. As far as a proxy war against China is in the works, I think that they're do seem to be two large imperialist camps, which is just to say advanced capitalist camps, forming, and that those lines are being drawn. I do think China is. It seems to me that they're, and again, this is not based on vast quantities of data, it seems to me that they're reluctant to jump into that. I don't think that, it's monolithically going in the direction that Russia is, for example. Even though there may be elements within China that do desire something like that, just head-on confrontation with the USA and EU, I don't think it's monolithic. That is my impression anyway. But as far as the USA and EU pushing back against this, and will that result in proxy wars? This is historically what capitalists do, so I don't know why they would not do it today. Unless, again, the thesis of ultra-imperialism turns out to be correct somehow, that they will just peaceably work out some division between themselves, and that will be that. But all the precedent is leaning towards war. So that's what, we as socialists trying to foster widespread class consciousness, etc., that's what we need to expect. Jimmy Dore used to be like the one decent voice on TYT. This was, this was a long time ago. Well, it's not even that long. It was about 5 or 6 years ago. But yeah, it was dramatically different. But again, then he started realizing that there was huge amounts of money in that libertarian MAGA political orbit. And it's like supporting Tulsi Gabbard over Bernie. Obviously, Bernie just wound up rolling over for the Dems anyway. But the fact that you would stick your neck out for Tulsi over Bernie, absurd. So, but again, it goes right in with that whole soft right horseshoeification. Looks like you're heading out to the left, and then you wind up on the fake path that actually bends back towards the right. We were talking about in the last stream. Has there been a gamer or comedian who hasn't been a tornado of shit when they try to cross over into serious political commentary? Just stay in the entertainment lane. Fair point. Literally, Infracel dropped out of law school, according to him anyway, to end up being this much of a fucking loser. Yeah. So, who even knows what went on there? Maybe he got kicked out, because I can't imagine too many schools would be super enthusiastic about the kind of fucking shit that he was doing online. Who knows? That was his Hitler not getting into art school moment. Yeah, who knows? Question, you don't think Jason Unruh, I'm guessing, because I just mentioned him, is qualified to be on television? That isn't what I'm saying. I'm saying random small bloggers and streamers, I don't think, why would you think that that's anybody's first choice? That's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to denigrate him on any particular thing, and that's not the point. The point is not attacking him. I'm saying of the huge amount of experts out there in the world, why would you go to some small blogger? What he's doing, as far as, especially, you go back and watch some of Jason's early stuff. It was it became more casual as time went on, I guess is the point that I'm trying to make. But he'd be there dressed up, and he would give this long presentation about Chinese history or whatever. It's fine, but it's blogger stuff. I don't know why some international news thing would be super keen on picking that up. That's all I'm really saying. All the people who work in the media, you have tons of contacts. It just doesn't seem to make a huge amount of sense. Xi Jinping has 2 buttons on his desk, the Socialism button and the World Land Bridge button, but he won't press either one, shaking my head. Yeah, there's also the contradiction between the sort of rabid supporters of China, hugely uncritical supporters of China. Today, well, they'll say in one breath, will be socialist by 2050, and then at the same time they're already socialist. Yeah. Again, I really look forward to the day that we can get past the propaganda level discussion on China to get to some better analysis of like, what are they still doing well, which I think is not an empty list, and what are they doing that is huge cause for concern. I think that that is also not an empty list. So, you know, yeah. But the problem is, like, when you raise any of these questions, and it could be partly just the social media format, um, there's rarely ever, like, pointing people to quality information that just sort of dispels the myth, explains the rumor, whatever it is. A lot of times it's just like lots of insults, except this point, uncritically or without evidence. And that to me actually has had a net effect on me of being like less convincing and undermining credibility to me. Is just like, well, so if you have to just back it up with insults, I don't understand. That to me seems to weaken your position. But yeah. So somebody makes the point. The difference is that Lenin's NEP was meant to destroy the petty bourgeois element in the country, which Lenin said was the worst enemy of the country. He explains this in his work, Left Wing Childishness or Left Wing Communism and Infantile. Or no, he did do multiple things. Left Wing Childishness. Did I do that one on the channel? Anyway, I know the piece you're talking about, and I sometimes assume when people put up similar things that they're talking about, there actually is a separate piece, left-wing childishness. I know the one you're talking about. China is building a petty bourgeois element. It's not an NEP phase, it's just capitalist. And of course the explanation for this is the quickest way to like build up the industry, the productive forces, etc. The concern, of course, is, well, assuming that that is accurate and not just a cover for opportunism, then are you going to be able to rein it in? You know. So somebody else says, I think it's about surviving within an imperialist world more than anything at this point. Yeah, but the way that that works is if you just this sounds a lot like if you can't beat them, join them. So if it's about just surviving within an imperialist world, the problem is that that's not how like the very premise of socialism in one country is it can't last that way for long. You can establish socialism within one country, but you also have to follow it up with world revolution. And that's for a number of reasons. One is you need the support of the international proletariat for your effort, which again, you know, China has lost a significant amount of that. And I'm just stating a fact here. This isn't even just my opinion. It's a fact. They've lost a lot of support, which often just gets waved away as like, well, who needed your support anyway? Okay, well, but if you can't explain basics of what you're doing convincingly, then do you deserve anyone's support? But yeah, this was like the case in the USSR as well. They needed the support of the European proletariat to try to restrain the capitalist governments from attacking the USSR while they could work on spreading the world revolution. Because you can't just go and invade every country or whatever. You just don't always have the resources for stuff like that. But and the other reason is that if the world revolution stalls, that's death for the entire project. Then in the countries where socialism has been established, it starts to slump backwards. You need that forward momentum. This is the whole premise of class struggle on the world stage. So you can't just merely survive as socialism in one country. This was settled like a long time ago. And that's even Stalin's point. Like that's the point of people who are for socialism in one country. It's also with the caveat that the world revolution must proceed because the basis of socialism in one country is temporary. So you can't just merely survive within an imperialist world this is like almost, this is like those libertarians that are like, we're just going to buy an island out in the middle of the ocean somewhere. Like, no, capitalism is going to come for you eventually. That's just not how it works. Yeah, so focus on the real enemy, U.S. imperialism, which is the worst on earth. That's not sufficient. That may be a true statement that the U.S. is the military arm of world imperialism right now, but that isn't how this entire world system works. You can't just, oh, don't look at China at all critically. As far as what's going on there, just at all. Like don't like you're saying don't understand what's happening in China, the good or the bad. Just focus on the US and that'll be fine. No, actually we need a understanding of what's going on in the entire world system. What do I think about the book that Luna Oy and American Johnson are writing? I know what you're talking about. I had not thought about it in a couple of months. I have not caught a Luna live stream in a couple of months, so I kind of forgot about it. I was interested in maybe reading it on the channel at some point, but yeah, I've just had my hands full with other stuff. There's some discussion of three worlds theory, that leads to Maoist third worldism. I actually have a section on this. I have the readings picked out. It's going to be a while before we get to it, but I do want to cover that on the channel. Again, the amount of reading people need to do and study in general to actually understand this stuff is extensive. And there's so many other things that we have to get to first on the channel. And, that's not to say people can't do this reading on their own or that people started doing it way before S4A was launched. Totally fine. As far as, this is the S4A live stream and etc. We're taking the particular course of study that we're doing and bringing people along who are following it. So anyway, we're basically caught up with the chat, and again, I think that we've given a taste of how contentious this discussion can be. Also, I mean, we didn't really get into any of the supporting information around it. I'm just trying to give a summary of, sociologically what's going on in the discussion as far as just analyzing some of the discussion. And again, my main takeaway after looking at this for a while is that most of the discussion is incredibly shallow, incredibly superficial. People tend to take sides, and it tends often not to be very well-rounded views. So that's my takeaway so far. And so that's going to be informing when we do broach the topic and really, start opening that can of worms. All of this will be informing my approach to it. We're probably not going to get to it for at least another year or two. So it is what it is. But there are certainly other channels and other resources for people who are trying to get into it sooner. That's all I'll say. It's just we work, within the limitations of time and the course of study that we're doing here on the channel, and I don't want to, I want to stick to that because I think it's important for the people who are moving along with it. So, all right. With all that said, that sort of very tense, dissonant note, let's move on into the COVID stuff, which of course is much more uplifting. No. Let's start off with an article. This is an older one that I've wanted to do for a while. It's from about a year ago, almost a year ago to the day, September 13, 2021. So this is from the BMJ. And COVID-19 and the New Merchants of Doubt is the title. Let's read through this. It's fairly short, but we have a whole bunch of stuff to cover. Actually, you know what? Before we get into this, I would like to remind people of what is going on with BA 4.6. So on the, you got two measures of the different COVID strains on the screen. This is from the CDC. So the bottom one, obviously, it's a map of the 10 regions of the United States. And the green color that there's the most of, that's BA5. That's been dominant for quite a while now. But it is starting to recede. It's like leveling out this week and the last week, and it's probably going to start receding really soon. What's going to be taking it over? Well, the strain that's in blue. That is BA.4.6. So it's a substrain of BA4, and it is actually able, slowly, but is able to outcompete BA5. You can see the blue sliver on the upper left graph or chart is growing week on week. It's growing at a small rate, 0.5% or 1% per week. Sometimes even less, 0.3, but it is steadily growing. And it's up now, according to this, to 8.4% of the overall COVID share. So that's significant. And this is probably going to be the next strain of COVID. So how many more weeks will it take for that to become fully dominant? Probably right in time for when we usually get a big spike, which is end of October into November. So that's probably what's going to happen. Now, like I said, they are unveiling the BA4, BA5 targeted shots as a booster. Now, we know that if it follows anything like the previous booster schedule, many people are just not going to get the shot. So that's bad in the first place because a lot of people just aren't going to get it. Meanwhile, they're rolling back so many of the transmission protections, what few transmission protections we've had. They're scaling those back. But keep your eye on BA 4.6 because it is growing week on week and probably will displace BA 5. Now, speaking of the things that are being rolled back, New York State, I was just mentioning somewhere, and it was New York State, is reducing even more mask restrictions. So this is from this week. New York State makes masking optional for residents. And they unveiled this sign. Masks are encouraged but optional. This stupid thing is covering it, but it says, let's respect each other's choices. No, I do not respect your choice to wantonly spread a dangerous, possibly disabling virus. No, I do not respect that choice. I've showed this screenshot before. This is just for kids. Fortune, blood clots, heart problems, kidney failure. COVID creates a higher risk for rare pediatric health problems. New CDC study finds. So the CDC knows this, and they're rolling these things back anyway. And, the booster shot will take care of everything. No, it really won't. Let's look at some information about the booster shot, by the way. This is Dr. Deepti Gurdasani on Twitter, at DRGURDASANI1, who does epidemiology and related things, and is talking here about a study. This is August 31st, so just about a week ago. Evidence from this study out today that hybrid immunity doesn't always mean a boost in immunity. What's hybrid immunity? Hybrid immunity is where you have an immune memory from both an actual infection and from a vaccine. So that's hybrid immunity. It doesn't always mean an overall boost in your immunity, which is a widely repeated myth. We've already seen evidence for, quote, imprinting from a previous infection. So what's that? It's where your immune system learns an early strain of COVID, which is now extinct because they do go extinct just in a matter of months now. Your immune system learns that, and then it has trouble learning a similar but different newer strain. So if your immune system gets trained on an old strain, it can have trouble adapting to a new one, which can mean that you can get hit harder by a new strain if you get reinfected, which of course is very common in an environment where there's basically no transmission controls, people aren't wearing masks, etc. Here's evidence that infection can actually dampen antibody response to booster shots. So in other words, this whole idea that, get the vaccine and then get a wild infection as well, and then, wow, your immune system is actually going to be super well-rounded. Well, no, it isn't. There's evidence that getting infected is going to make the booster shot less effective. Now, let me just say before proceeding, does this mean don't get the booster? No. The booster is still probably helpful, but the infection is going to reduce its effectiveness. But what it really does mean is that vax only, which was always too weak of a pillar to rest your entire COVID control response on, it means that already too weak support is even weaker than we thought. So this has more about the implications of what the society needs to do to control this disease. It means that the boosters aren't even going to be as effective as we thought they were, because it's going to be confounded by the infection. All right. We know that imprinting by previous infection from specific variants can dampen subsequent immune responses to Omicron post-booster and post-Omicron infection. So not all prior infections plus vax means better immunity to Omicron. And it'd be super great if I brought up the correct slide. There we go. The current preprint, it's not published or peer-reviewed yet, although let me add that this isn't the first statement of this basic concept about the hybrid immunity. Compares 3 groups: 44 people boosted with no history of prior infection, purple; 11 people boosted with history of past infection 56 to 601 days before the booster, blue; and 11 people infected with BA1, that was original Omicron, post-booster, that is orange. What did they find? Antibody levels measured against multiple variants showed that while baseline antibodies were higher in those with prior infection, as inspected, and increased at 30 days, they dropped by 60 days, compared with the uninfected and post-booster infected groups. So at 60 days post-booster, despite having had higher antibodies at baseline than those with prior infection, despite having had higher antibodies at baseline, needs a comma there. This is a limitation of Twitter. Just sometimes crucial punctuation will put you over the character limit. Anyway, those with prior infection, blue lines, actually had lower antibodies than even the uninfected group, purple, and the post-booster infected group, orange. So all the people, in other words, this is suggesting, who have gotten sick, and there were about 100,000 cases a day for like the last 5 months or so. All these people who got sick, these tens of millions of people who got infected, the booster now may not, they're trying to get this silver bullet booster shot for BA4 and BA5. It may not actually be as effective as people would think. And will it be somewhat effective? Will it keep people out of the hospital? Yeah, probably. But will it be as effective as you need it to be to rest your entire COVID control strategy on it? Probably not even without this, but with it, all the less so. All right. The authors find that this was mostly driven by those who were boosted within 180 days of prior infection. So recent infection, here up to 6 months, is most important here. Those who had infection more than 6 months ago behaved more like the uninfected. So what does this suggest? Well, let's go on to the next tweet. This doesn't mean that those with prior infection had no protection. They had antibodies at baseline because of the infection, but the response to the boosters was dampened at 60 days compared to those who did not have infection. So overall antibodies were lower at 60 days post-booster. So let's summarize here. So basically, those who were boosted within 180 days of prior infection, so that's basically 6 months, recent infection is most important here. People who had an infection more than 6 months ago behaved more like the uninfected. So in other words, if the last time that you got COVID, according to this study is suggesting, if the last time you got COVID was more than 6 months prior to your getting the booster, then probably that 6 months ago or longer infection won't interfere with the booster so much. So for example, if the last time that you got COVID was during the December, January, little bit into February BA1 spike, the big Omicron spike of the winter, that was over 6 months ago. So that may not really interfere with you getting a booster today. However, if you're one of the tens of millions of people who got COVID in the last 6 months, which we are still in a massive explosion of COVID cases, the most sustained one of the whole pandemic outside of Delta and Omicron, then that most likely is going to make your booster less effective if you get one now or in the next month. And so when you need it in December and January, it may not really work that well. So that's really concerning because everybody wants what protection they can get. Ultimately, again, we've said this a million times, we need to stop transmission. You need to stop this thing from circulating. You need to stop putting it in people's bodies for all kinds of reasons. But anyway, It's worth noting that neutralizing antibody titers in lab studies have generally correlated quite well with protection from infection in clinical and epidemiological studies. So while this is a lab study, these findings are still important, because again, they do correspond with real-world effects. How about those who were uninfected versus those infected after their booster? Antibody titers were similar between the uninfected and post-infected, infected after booster, group at baseline, and marginally higher at day 60 in the post-infected group. Why did those with recent prior infection see a dampened response to boosting? The authors suggest that the B cells, the cells that produce antibodies, may not have had time to return to their resting state in order to respond efficiently to the booster shot after infection. So in other words, it's hypothesized by the people who did this study that the reason why, if you got COVID in the last 6 months, that you're not responding, excuse me, that you're not responding to the booster as well, is because your immune system is still not back to fully reset position because of your infection. And because it's not fully reset, you can't have the response, the full response that you need to have to the booster shot. That's basically the theory. So what does this mean? It means that hybrid immunity being better than vax-only immunity is not a given. This is being sold by some experts as the answer to all problems, but there are multiple issues with this. Hybrid immunity is immunity from infection and vax. Evidence suggests that while in some scenarios this may provide an additional immune boost, this doesn't always happen. E.g., those with prior infection with the Wuhan variant saw dampened responses to Omicron post-vax. In the current study, prior infection actually blunted the booster response, and those who were uninfected had higher levels of antibodies at 60 days post-booster. And when we're talking about 60 days post-booster, this is you get the shot, and what is your protection level 2 months later? That's pretty important, because if you want that booster shot to last, more than a minute, this is important. So I assume that people getting the booster shot now or next month think it's going to be covering them all winter. Well, yeah. Even in those with infection post-vax, antibodies were only very marginally higher than those who were uninfected at 60 days. Of course, the major problem with the hybrid immunity cell is that getting infected, which is really, and so why are they trying to sell hybrid immunity in the first place? It's part of the notion that getting sick with COVID isn't that bad. That's what this is all about. It's about, we don't need to disrupt society, read commerce, for COVID-19. That's what it is. So that's why they're pushing hybrid immunity of like, get the vaccine and then get sick and you'll be great. It'll be like a chickenpox party. Yay. No. This is just a sloppy excuse for them to not close businesses, not do mask mandates, not have any society-wide level public health controls. It's all being put on the individual. All right. Of course, the major problem with the hybrid immunity cell is that getting infected to prevent infection makes no sense. It's not supported by the data here. And even if you get infected post-vax, it isn't necessarily mild. You can still get long COVID or even severe acute disease in some. So we've covered this before too. Your odds of getting long COVID do drop if you get vaxxed, and boosted doesn't have that big of an impact. It will reduce your odds by like another percentage point or two. Really, mostly it's if you get the baseline vaccine that most of the reduction in your long COVID risk happens. But even when it's fully reduced, even when your risk of long COVID is fully reduced, it's still 1 in 6, which is substantial. So yeah, even if you get infected post-vax, it isn't necessarily mild. And even if you do have, quote, mild acute symptoms, you can still get brain shrinkage. Like your odds of getting long COVID go up dramatically. They about double if you get hospitalized. But between asymptomatic, mild, and moderate acute cases, your odds of long COVID are the same. So it doesn't matter if you had an asymptomatic case, you can still get brain shrinkage and cognitive deficits out of it. So it's tremendously irresponsible on many levels to just keep encouraging COVID to spread, which is exactly, in the example of New York State. Just respect each other's choices. No, I don't respect your choice to spread fucking brain damage. No, I don't respect that. No one should. There should be mass demonstrations about it. We're still waiting for that to catch on. But as far as the, nobody gives a shit, Yeah, I think actually if people were better informed of the risks here, they probably would give a shit. And actually, the mask mandates on transportation, like planes and stuff like that, it varied by demographic, but many demographics did overwhelmingly still want mask mandates. So this isn't even popular with people, and they're just pushing it hard anyway. This is the capitalist ruling class enforcing their agenda, and of course, it's in contrast to what is in the interest of working people, and in many cases, working people know it. This isn't like, brain surgery necessarily. So anyway, long COVID isn't even uncommon post-booster with Omicron. Evidence from the ONS suggests that 4 to 5% of people who get infected with Omicron develop persistent symptoms. I think that there's significant evidence that it's even more than that. But anyway, and then there's post-acute sequelae. Well, okay, so she's separating that out. So, see, this is the big problem. It's like, how do you define long COVID? I would put the post-acute sequelae, which are just consequences of getting COVID. I would put that in long COVID. But anyway, higher risk of heart disease, stroke, clotting, kidney disease, diabetes, neurocognitive problems, psychiatric disease, even at 1 year post-infection, with the protection from vaccination being modest against this. So like we said, even with getting vaccinated, your odds of getting all this stuff are still like 1 in 6, at least, so still pretty bad odds. So in summary, hybrid immunity isn't a general phenomenon, in that it doesn't happen in all circumstances, and it can be very specific to a person's infection history. Infection can actually lead to dampened response to the booster if it's recent. This is also important when considering when to boost for people who have had recent infections. Maybe delays should be considered to allow people's immune systems to recover to get the best possible response to the booster shots. But this is also challenging given that infection from Omicron seems to provide only short-term protection against other Omicron subvariants. The prior infection here was generally in the pre-Omicron era, so it's hard to know what this means in the Omicron era. Omicron is the most significantly mutated form of COVID, and it does behave differently. One thing is clear, this is the end of the thread, the pursuit of hybrid immunity makes little sense when the risks are so high, both from the acute stage of COVID, landing you in the hospital or dead, whatever, and then from long COVID, and previous infection can even dampen future responses rather than boost them, which is the hopium that we've been sold. So there is discussion of possibly like why this, magic bullet of the BA4, BA5 booster isn't going to work so well, because we just got tens of millions of people getting COVID, and if they boost within 6 months of that, we might not have that effective of a effect from the booster shots. So anyway, what else do we have up? I'm just going to jam through these today. What's this article? Yeah, so about the kids. This is from ABC News, or is it NBC News? Yeah. CDC's, the Peacock one. CDC's new COVID guidelines for schools. Kids should stay in class if exposed. The change in advice reflects a shift from preventing COVID infections to protecting against the most severe outcomes of the virus. And again, you're letting the virus mutate every time that you let it replicate. So how long until mortality goes up with some, new Omicron level of infection? So this is from a few weeks ago, but just to recap, in case you're not up on what's actually going on now with all the things that are being repealed in the COVID control strategies by Erika Edwards, August 11. Students can stay in the classroom this fall if they've been exposed to COVID. The CDC, or just call it the CD, Centers for Disease, said Wednesday in an updated guidance. The transition away from quarantining signals an end to several years of remote schooling that stunted learning, linked there, and increased mental health problems. You know what else can increase mental health problems? Losing a parent or just getting COVID. It can give you anxiety and depression in itself. Quote, the updated CDC guidance recognizes that the best place for children is in the classroom. So, you know what? I can't even read this anymore. We just did the article. The safest place for your children is in the scorpion pit. It's this exactly. It was what they were toying with back then is now just full on, no, it's beyond parody because they're actually doing it. Let's move on to the next article. I can't read it. It's traumatic watching a country just sacrifice its children in this way. And there's no end in sight. Could there be some magical turn in the pandemic this fall or winter? I guess so. Do we have evidence to believe that that's the case? No, we do not. Remember, this is coming from the same people who told you that, like, Omicron was the end of the pandemic. Well, no. And again, just to remind people of how much it is not the end of the pandemic, look at the current lump of COVID cases. It's larger than any except for the Omicron lump. So that's where we're at. This is very much not the end of the pandemic. Anyway, so we have an article here from The Atlantic. Their articles are often tainted, but do hit on some good ideas sometimes. Willed helplessness is the American condition. To wrap your mind around the reality of long COVID and its randomness is terrifying, by Meghan O'Rourke. And, you know, it may not actually be random, but when you don't understand the causes of things, which we don't fully understand why long COVID hit some people and not others, it can seem random. If a pandemic is a lens onto how we understand our moral responsibility to the community, this moment of risk discourse is revealing that we don't care about one another very much. Well, let me add to that, at least the people making these decisions don't care about us very much. I was not asked my opinion on this decision. I do not have that power. The people who do have that power clearly don't care about us very much. In place of yesterday's calls to flatten the curve, today a kind of willed helplessness has stiffened into place, an emotional rigor mortis. So again, you can see already, this is trying to generalize the COVID response onto random people and seek just a psychological rather than a material, like economic, specifically economic cause, which is, I think, clearly where this is actually coming from. So beware, that's clearly some of the setup framing. On the day last spring that a federal judge ruled against the CDC's mask mandates on public transportation, I got tangled up trying to adjust my son's mask before entering his kindergarten, the chill air biting my fingers. The wind howled and I felt like howling too. Months later, I still do. In the third year of the coronavirus pandemic, we as a nation have largely resumed life as normal. We've dropped mask mandates, made information about case rates harder to access, adopted the sunny view that Omicron is, quote, mild. But some of us have had a hard time ignoring the ongoing risks. In my case, because I have a complicated health history. Let's just add, that federal judge that ruled against the CDC's mask mandates, this was a random Trump appointee, unqualified judge in the first place, whose ruling just rippled throughout the entire system, and apparently nobody has been able to get it under control. It's not popular, it's not supported by public opinion, but people go along, by and large, with what is said. Especially if it appears to be more convenient, which convenience is one of the primary values in U.S. culture. It will often outweigh many other priorities. The reality that an infection can trigger a cascade of after effects capable of ruining or permanently altering lives is not abstract to me. I had a condition that closely resembled long COVID for more than a decade, the result of untreated Lyme disease. By the way, if you get bitten by a tick and you know it, try to save the tick, bring it to wherever you're going to get care. If you get on antibiotics in the first 24, 48 hours, a lot of times you can avoid, ticks carry some really nasty shit, and a lot of times early stage antibiotics, like very early on after the bite, can be helpful. Sometimes if you save the tick, they can analyze what was in it. Anyway, it manifested as brain fog, fatigue, dizziness, and the kind of dysfunction of the nervous system that COVID-19 can trigger. What no one understands, until you have the experience, is that while such an illness may not necessarily kill you, it brings death with it, the death of all kinds of once vivid possibilities and dreams. What long COVID can deliver, suffering without much hope of relief, without a plan, is present in my mind. When you live at the edge of medical knowledge, you lack a clear path forward. To get ill is a consequence of being mortal, but the ways in which we get sick and experience disease are shaped by social constructs around public health measures. There is the disease, and then there is the experience of the disease, your illness, which is shaped by the history of medicine and by politics. Science seeks to find the truth, but it's performed by fallible humans, whose collective power decides whose stories get told, which resources go to whom, and so forth. Let's just clarify, this is what we're always talking about. Science is constrained by capitalism. If the scientific findings, go against the short-term profits, the science will get muzzled. That's what it's about. So, fallible humans, collective power, blah, 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 fucking capitalism, okay? And right now, America is sliding into the long pandemic defeat, as the headline on an Ed Yong article recently put it. Many federal officials and public health leaders continue to stress the, quote, mild cases and the trend toward positive outcomes. See President Joe Biden saying that he, quote, worked through his recent infection. Clearly propaganda for people listening, like, you get COVID, just keep working. Rather than reckoning with ongoing waves and the grim early data about long COVID's prevalence. By the way, let's just remember here, if I can bring up the thing, even mild COVID can cause your brain to shrink. This needs to be like, when somebody starts saying it, everyone in unison, like, can cause your brain to shrink. Even mild COVID-19. Like, you get it, it's asymptomatic, it's mild, you have a cough, you have a runny nose, you get a fever for a day, that's it. Even mild COVID-19 can cause your brain to shrink. Recent brain imaging shows that the disease can cause physical changes equivalent to a decade of aging and trigger problems with attention and memory. And we don't even know why. What we do know is that neurotropic viruses that show an affinity for the nervous system and brain, often have really devastating results. So, anyway, rather than reckoning with ongoing waves and the grim early data about COVID's prevalence. We have two problems, in short. The first is that the pandemic is very much not over, whatever we might wish. The second is that we are pretending it is over. To be sure, at some point, we must all make our own risk assessments. What does this mean? To be sure, at some point, we must all make our own risk assessments. No, we need to control the disease. That effort was abandoned in mid-effort. That was abandoned with mask or vax. That decision was made for us. So, making our own risk assessments at this point, no one is low risk. No one. So, anyway. Yet Americans may not have a clear sense of how out of control the pandemic remains, or how vulnerable many of us are to its long-term effects. New variants, such as BA.5, have properties of immune evasion, meaning that they're able to make you sick even if you're vaccinated or have already had COVID, allowing for more frequent reinfections and raising the specter of a troublingly limited immunity and possibly new long-term consequences each time. Importantly, vaccines still limit deaths and hospitalizations. They seem to lower the risk of long COVID, but they can't be counted on to prevent it. Long COVID is likely an umbrella term for a handful of different conditions. In some cases, it can bring with it mild dysfunction. In others, however, it's debilitating, and it can mean the radical upheaval of one's life. The current figures for long COVID's prevalence are staggering. In May, the CDC released a study suggesting that nearly 1 in 5 people ages 18 to 64 who contract COVID-19 may develop long COVID. That would be 20%. That also aligns with other studies. We read one from William Haseltine in a previous COVID update. That was the one where unvaccinated, I think this was in Italy, the likelihood was 40%. With the 2 shots, it went down to like 17%. And then with the booster, it went down to 16%. So that's about as low as you can get it, is how it seems. The current figures, that was that. That suggests that currently 7.5% of American adults are living with ongoing effects of COVID. A March report from the Government Accountability Office, GAO, found that up to 23 million Americans had developed long COVID. Even a more conservative study found that as many as 5% of those infected with Omicron end up with long COVID. A big problem is that we still don't know exactly what causes or how to treat the most notorious long COVID symptoms, including brain fog, read brain damage, cognitive impairment, and fatigue. But there is promising science out there. Mounting evidence suggests that the coronavirus can persist in parts of the body after acute infection, that it can cause minute blood clots throughout the vascular system. Sounds great. And that it can trigger immune dysfunction and autoimmune activity. Turning these leads into therapeutics and effective rehab should be an urgent priority, in part because conventional methods, which involve, quote, pushing through it, can make matters worse. So if you don't let your body recover, it can make it worse. Now, let's say also something about turning these into therapeutics and effective rehab. What do we know about the U.S. medical system? Can people usually get good quality care and pay for it? No. So most people who get long COVID are not going to be able to get treatment for it. David Putrino, the Director of Rehabilitation Innovation for the Mount Sinai Health System in New York, noted in a June talk at the Aspen Ideas Health Festival that long COVID can be progressive, and many people don't even realize that they have it, but they're likely to get sicker as time goes on. This progressive aspect of the disease is often missed in the media. Even folks with, quote, mild long COVID can end up unable to leave their house or bed as time goes on, researchers have told me. Then, too, long COVID can affect the young. We say that the elderly are the most, quote, at risk from COVID, meaning most likely to die during the acute infection. But long COVID poses a serious risk to young people whose future, limited by impairment, may now look radically different. Data from Putrino's clinic found that the median age for those with long COVID is 42. Already, the shadow pandemic is bringing with it large-scale social shifts. On July 19, Katie Bach, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a workforce expert, testified to a House subcommittee hearing on long COVID that the estimated effects were equivalent to 3.3 million Americans, 2.4% of the full-time workforce, leaving their full-time job. We did a story on that recently, last week. Trying to address the problem, Congress has devoted $1.15 billion to the National Institutes of Health's Recover program, a series of research initiatives designed to understand long COVID, and the Biden administration has just released a two-pronged action plan for future research and services. To date, though, the Recover work has been mainly observational, lacking the urgency that the unfolding disaster merits. I mean, not only that, but so you're going to say it's enough of a problem that you're going to put all this money into it, but then you're not going to stop people from getting it in the interim. Transmission control. No, we got to keep those fucking restaurants open, don't you know? That's the priority. People want to look away from the problem, and if you're not the NIH, that's understandable. To wrap your mind around the reality of long COVID and its apparent randomness is terrifying. In this sense, to think about long COVID is not unlike trying to think about the climate crisis. Claims of empathy are taxing. The general population has never done a good job of looking at the pain of others, let alone been moved to make changes once it does. No we should be taken for granted when the subject is looking at other people's pain, Susan Sontag wrote in Regarding the Pain of Others, her critique of the idea that liberal appeals to empathy could stop war. We do need to balance public safety with mental health. Certainly, I'm not calling for lockdown. What do you mean, certainly? Now, it's, to be fair, there are many things short of a shutdown that you can do that would help to control transmission. But you can't rule that out on a targeted basis as needed. You can't rule that out. All too often, those of us who advocate for more public health measures around COVID and more long COVID awareness are painted as indifferent to the mental, fuck this. Anyway, COVID itself is a mental health crisis. So I think that this is dramatically overblown to the point of I've had enough of that. But anyway, what could we do? At the very least, we could implement mask mandates when cases rise. See, but even this is incredibly weak, because when cases rise, it's too late for the mask mandates. Do you get that? Do you get that it's already too late at that point? And prioritize safer air in public buildings and public transportation. Personally, I think we should all be wearing masks on public transportation until we've got a firmer grasp on long COVID. Well, and we would be if some random MAGA judge hadn't issued an opinion to the contrary. We could put more resources into booster campaigns, although with caveats, as we just read about, and help people stay informed about caseloads so that they can make informed decisions about risk. Yeah, again, informed personal decisions about risk is not the framing that we need at this point. As a nation, we ought to acknowledge the scope of long COVID. Well, so you've already got institutional recognition of it. What you're missing is action. And what is the missing ingredient for getting that action? A functioning workers' movement. That's what's missing. So that's what we actually need to do. Anyway, as a nation, we ought to acknowledge the scope of long COVID and grapple with the social consequences of a mass disabling or mass deterioration event, as Ben Mazur has called it in this magazine. The NIH needs to lead with more urgency and innovation than it has to date, listening to the expertise of researchers in infection-associated illness in fields such as myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome, MECFS as it is often called. Recover needs to focus on clinical trials, and we need significant integration of post-viral experts. Hannah Davis, a co-founder of Patient-Led Research Collaborative, told me. We need better diagnosis and timely treatment and workplace accommodations, I'll add, and universal health care. Politicians must hold insurance companies... No. Politicians must hold insurance companies and disability agencies accountable for the support that they owe. How about abolish them and replace it with a nationalized system? That's what we actually need. We all need to concern ourselves not just with our personal risk of long COVID, but with the important collective outcome here, a future where more of us have a future. The rush to normalcy papers over the reality that we are not going back to a world before COVID. Like everyone else, I'm nostalgic for that world, but I also don't want to live in a society that thinks it's okay to sacrifice the vulnerable for its own comfort. There's a difference between the science-backed pursuit of restoring our lives to their fullest possible meaning, the joy of spontaneity, and lying to ourselves that COVID-19 is, quote, just the flu. We want our old life, we need to build our new one. So I'm going to end it there for COVID articles today. What I'm going to lead off with in the next stream is there's a couple of articles, they're talking about the institutions, the NIH, etc. There's a couple of articles I have about the CDC, kind of doing a mea culpa and like Rochelle Walensky acknowledging mistakes made, quote unquote, during this thing. And I'd like to get into that more in the next stream as we continue the research. But let's check in with the chat and then close out the stream for today, because there will be more streams in the future. All right, so this sort of tapers off from the discussion on China that we were having before. Very minimal, limited discussion, by the way. Have we covered any works on the Sino-Soviet split? Not really yet, but I am currently assembling, well, I think I actually already have assembled a vast collection of works leading up to the Sino-Soviet split, and that will also encompass the Three Worlds theory and criticisms of it. But there's a lot. There's really a lot. But and what we want to do on the channel first, just to explain, there's a lot of like early texts, Marx, Engels, Liebknecht, Kautsky even, Luxemburg, Lenin, etc., etc. Like, there's a lot of groundwork that I want to lay before we get into those things so that people can understand it. This channel is not oriented, and I know that most of the people following it know that it is not oriented around, the, quote, winning debates or whatever. We're trying to actually do serious education to the point that that is possible through a YouTube channel. And laying the groundwork with all of those earlier texts is important. By the way, I don't always see those texts getting all of the views that they should get in comparison to other videos. If you're skipping over the readings, try not to, because they are important. All right. Anyway, let's see. It's funny because I'm constantly being bombarded by my friends' bullshit on how the vaccines are killing everyone. Yeah, you still get like an enormous amount of that. Like, that was never combated properly in the first place. I don't know who keeps spreading that bullshit, but it seems to be getting worse. The libertarian conspiracies are spreading like wildfire. Because it's the easiest position that you can take with doing no research, no real thought. It's just you take an inflammatory position counter to the, whatever the current thing is, attribute it to the Rothschilds or whatever, and you're on your way. You're up and running. You can probably even set up like a grifty YouTube channel just doing that. And it's so easy, but their understanding of anything is just completely lacking. But it's super easy. It gives a lot of people a real sense of false empowerment that, oh, look at me, I'm doing something, I'm part of the movement, this and that. But the movement's a bunch of dupes following around a bunch of grifters. So, yeah. Let's see. It's a good question about housing. Maybe you can raise that later. Actually, I do have a whole series of readings on housing that I would like to do as well. If you'd like to see me spending more time on the channel, I honestly will need more financial support. I'm already maxing out how much time I can spend on this channel every week. There's tons of readings that I would like to do. I would also like to stream more often, but I really would need more support to be able to give it any more time than I'm giving. That said, there's a bundle of readings about the housing industrial complex, or the homeless industrial complex, that I have. They're sitting there, and they will be read. We will do probably take a whole month on that topic. But again, time is a huge factor. All right. Means testing policies always seem to be meant to instigate class antagonism of the petty bourgeois labor aristocracy against the proletariat and lumpen proletariat. We should have mass public housing and end homelessness. That's a decent short answer. How the fuck do we even begin to heal from the long-term damage done by COVID? Just the brain and nerve damage alone. Yeah, nerve tissue does not heal under most circumstances. So we don't know if, in fact, I think that from what I've seen, that cognitive impairment is still present 2 years out after long COVID. There's many indications that it is in fact permanent. So that's something you may not be able to heal from, or you will need kinds of therapy that sort of shifts some of the burden to other parts of your brain. Whether there will be a complete recovery, we don't know. But long COVID is not well understood, and that's kind of the point. So, we can pass funding. The Congress will see fit to pass funding to study this more. In the meantime, they're not honoring the fact that it's significant enough to study by preventing people from getting it. It's completely contradictory. Long COVID might be nonsense, though. I think you're in the wrong place. I reckon it's real, but there's doubt. I don't know. Are you new here? Because we have been covering this for years now. Like, we've been covering this for a long time. We are not in a post-COVID era. How about you just get the fuck out of the chat? Really? By post-COVID era. We just had, like, the biggest sustained surge outside of Omicron, as I put on the screen. Let's see. Somebody says veganism is a great way to prevent future pandemics. I don't think entirely. It's true that CAFOs, the large factory farm situations, do breed tons of disease. I don't know if that's entirely the way, but yeah, most people could stand to eat much less meat. I mean, you can live on 0% meat, so, I mean, most people could stand to eat a lot less, for sure. That's, having the sort of nutritional knowledge and stuff, and cooking ability and all that stuff to be able to make that switch is something that doesn't necessarily come overnight. But yeah, a lot of people could stand to eat a lot less meat, for sure. Yeah, and people looking to get into that more, Asian cookbooks. Obviously, there's also a lot of meat that you can find in Asian recipes. And I'm talking, everything Korea, China, Japan, India, like Asia. But yeah, look into it because if you just sort of know European, UK based sort of that sort of cooking, that type of recipe, it can change your thinking about a lot of things. Also, their uses of herbs and spices, which also have health effects, many of them, is much more extensive than you'd find in most European stuff. No, so all we know is that COVID originated from Wuhan and nothing really else. No, not even, because it was in the wastewater in Italy and possibly other places like Spain in 2019 as well. So no, we don't know that. We know that the first big recognized outbreak was in Wuhan, but we also know that China's taken this whole thing a lot more seriously. So it could have been spreading, for example, in southern Europe, and just nobody really taking it seriously. So literally nobody's talking about it being in Europe before Wuhan. So yeah, we've mentioned that many times, and let me make a note of just pulling an article on that because I did actually have kind of a study speaking to that. Wuhan EU origins. Ultimately, like the origin doesn't matter as much at this point as just fucking stopping the pandemic. We can talk about where it came from afterwards. Right now, I don't think that that's super germane to just like stopping it from spreading. But yeah, it probably it may not have originated in Wuhan actually. Yeah, the origins, it's kind of trivia. I think that there's much more important things at this point. You know, we can talk about it, but like after people stop getting COVID. USA has created insane superbugs. We are already past the tipping point on entering a post-antibiotic era. So I actually have two really interesting articles about that. So maybe the next show, and I'll make a note of it now, I can do on number one, the sort of CDC institutional stuff, and two, on other emerging diseases. Yeah, and then I'll see if I can throw in that origins thing just so that I think that was pretty short, the resource that I had, so probably can throw that into the same stream. Somebody's getting overloaded with communist bullshit. Give me a minute. Maybe you could just leave the stream. Let me help, actually. There you go. Like, enters communist stream, complains about getting communist information. Okay. Alrighty then. Civilization first appeared in Mesopotamia because they overproduced the shit out of wheat. The wheat beef people. So this is like kind of the basis of like quote the West is you know it's like the staff of life thing. Like it's sort of like wheat predominantly in like Europe and related areas, and then rice more towards Asia. It's obviously not exclusive, and there's overlap, but yeah. Yeah, the wheat beef people. This is like in anthropology. If you just look up that term, you can find a lot about that. Somebody's talking about the best form of protein. The protein understander is here. Yeah, so the thing about protein, you need complete protein. So there are proteins that your body can synthesize, and there are proteins that your body needs in the diet that it cannot synthesize but needs. These are essential. It's just like fatty acids. There's essential fatty acids your body can't synthesize. You need them in the diet. There's other, fats that you can make out of other stuff. But yeah, protein is not nearly as hard to get as people make it out to be, or as let's say anti-vegetarian activists often make it out to be. So yeah, you do have to combine usually different. There's very few plant foods that are a complete protein in and of themselves. There are a few, but usually you have to combine plant protein sources in order to get complete protein. It's super easy though, because how often do you eat a meal of like literally just one food? Like, what'd you have for lunch today? Potatoes. They were delicious. Anything else with those? No, just potatoes. What'd you have for lunch today? Corn. No, people usually combine foods in the first place, so it's not that difficult. This is why you see beans and rice together a lot, because there's a couple of amino acids that you need that are not or found in grains so much, or found in low numbers that are more plentiful in beans, and then vice versa, so they kind of fit together nicely as a complete protein. So yeah. Didn't Susan Sontag ghostwrite Larry the Cable Guy's book? My brain just exploded. I don't know. Maybe somebody can research that and get back to us. That's hilarious. Take a sip here. The concerted effort by capital to convince people that COVID is over has worked. There isn't much organized pushback. I'll give you that. And also, shame on every left organization that has not done jack shit about this. I mean, deep shame. This is an emerging, crisis, and the silence has been deafening. At some point, things will have to get so bad that the capitalists cannot lie or cover up the pandemic anymore. Yeah, and that will be fucking ugly when it happens. I agree with you, though. I expect more half-assed measures to create this exact situation again. People will believe it's over when it's not. It's amazing, how far the willingness to believe a lie really goes. Willful ignorance. Somebody coined the term partipulation. Participate in your own manipulation. That's thriving. Some discussion of football. That's soccer to people in the U.S. I think there's a JAMA article, Journal of the AMA, showing that it is impossible to get enough calories to sustain your life and not have enough protein. Yeah, I've heard that as well. I haven't read that study, but I have heard previously that if you're getting enough calories, you're likely getting enough protein without any special effort. The, quote, complete protein myth has been retracted by the researcher that first wrote about it by studying malnourished groups in Africa who are literally starving. So I've heard that as well. I mean, if you're trying to have a higher protein intake for some reason, you can mind the amino acids a bit more. But yeah, I think that is probably true. If you're getting enough calories, you're probably getting enough protein. Unless you're literally getting your calories from just drinking oil, you're drinking vegetable oil or something, which just does not have protein in it. Or you're just eating refined starch for several thousand calories a day, then yeah, you may not be getting enough protein. By and large, if you're just eating a varied diet and you have enough calories, odds are you're getting enough protein. I've heard that as well. But there are people who have heightened protein needs, if you exercise a lot, if you lift weights or whatever, you may want to take more. But it's really not difficult at all, just even from your diet, or make yourself a smoothie, throw in a blender a banana, maybe a little bit of frozen berries, scoop a protein powder that's going to give you 20-25 grams of protein, complete, because usually they have, it'll be a blend of pea and rice protein, or, sometimes they put other seeds in it and stuff like that as well to just round it out. I mean, I saw a very good protein that they say that egg is the closest, in terms of what the human body needs. I haven't fully evaluated this, but apparently it's the amino acid profile found in chicken eggs is really close to the exact thing that your body is looking for. Anyway, there was so I did see a fairly inexpensive protein powder that was really close to that. I actually counted, did the breakdown on that. But yeah, it's not hard. So if there's people who are considering taking on a more vegetarian diet, that don't. That's one of the things that people are often most freaked out about is the loss of protein. But don't necessarily let that scare you, especially with the internet now. Don't fall into any of the super quack stuff. I would recommend, for the most part, staying away from the entire raw vegan movement is largely garbage. That's not to say that there are some, benefits to like raw juices and stuff like that. Like a lot of people who eat a very like processed and you know heat-inducing diet, a lot of times can benefit from like those very cooling juices. At least to a certain extent, it can help round out what can be very meat-based like diet. But the amount of like flakes, quacks, and grifters in the raw vegan thing is off the charts. I mean, it's just nuts. But yeah, I mean, be careful you don't just have too much starch or something like that as well. I mean, most people just eat a lot anyway. Probably many people could just stand to eat less. It's hard because a lot of the food is not super satiating. It's not satisfying, so people wind up overeating because their brain is just like, I have not eaten any minerals or anything, and so you just keep the signal stays on to just keep eating and eating. That's aside from like blood sugar issues too. All right. Well, we're pretty much caught up with the chat, and I think it's about time to wrap up anyway. We'll be back soon with another stream. I may be back this week with another one. We will be getting back to some audiobooks soon, but it has been nice for me to get away from that from the time being and to just catch up on some of this current event stuff. It's kind of nice. So I understand that there's a lot of live streams up in a row on the channel, but that won't be all it is for eternity. Like I said, I've been making a real point of trying to catch up with COVID, particularly as we're probably going into a temporary lull between waves. And then as the waves start to pick up, all these articles come pouring out, and it's impossible to keep up with them. So I'm trying to catch up now that we're in a lull. But we will get back into audiobooks as well, so hang in there. On the other hand, there's also over 200 audiobooks. There's like 85 Lenin audiobooks alone on the channel, so maybe go through some of those playlists that you can access from the Home tab or the Playlists tab, and check out some works from some authors that you maybe haven't read or topics that you haven't looked into yet. All right, thanks to everybody dropping in on the live stream and contributing to the chat, and thanks also to the people listening to this after the fact on YouTube. We'll catch you next time.